Hey, hello everybody. Sorry I'm a little bit late there. My name's Jasper, if you're just joining us for the first time, and welcome to our weekly question and answer here at the My Endurance Hub space. You'll see I got a nice new background today. It's not actually a new background, I'm just at home. um, anyway, as a reminder, these sessions are recorded. I see we got a few people trickling in here, which is great. Yeah, so they're recorded, and if you want to check them out after, you can find them in the free space here at the My Endurance Hub. You can see all the recordings from the past. So we title them with some of the questions that were asked, or some of the topics that were covered. So if you have an interest in some of those or some questions, you can review those. They're great to review. Certainly, if something strikes a chord here, or if you have a friend that is maybe interested in some of the topics that we covered, please let them know that they can find them here as well. Reminder too that we have amazing content that we've created for you here at the My Endurance Hub space. Tons of stuff, webinars. We've got master classes. We've got our AI coach Victor, who's there to answer all kinds of questions. He's really quite amazing. We have training programs, everything you can find to get you going on your endurance journey. So if you have a question, the best way is to put it in the chat function. So you'll see that bottom right of the screen. You'll see a little chat bubble. I see some questions already popping in there, which is great. You can raise your hand as well. There's a little raise your hand function. Hopefully I'll see it. Usually I'm just paying attention to the chat. So thanks for being flexible today. We had to bump it back half an hour. Life as a dad here, zipping kids around, and I couldn't adjust that schedule. So thank you for being flexible. So let's get going. James Anderson looks like he's got a couple questions here. He says, hello, hi, James. Nice to have you. Where are you from, James? Maybe pop it in the chat. I'm always curious to see where people are joining us from. Our membership's amazing. I mean, gosh, we have people from Australia and Hong Kong and New Zealand and the US, and of course Canada, where we're based. Lots of great interest from around the world, which is so cool. Okay, James, let's get started. How should an athlete's training schedule? Oh, James says he's in Phoenix, Arizona. Right on. Nice. Thanks for joining us all the way from Phoenix. I've been down there a couple times actually for races in Tempe, Arizona. We had Ironman Arizona. Oh, right on. Just ran the Ironman in Tempe. Nice job. That's so great. God, good for you. Very cool. Yeah, that's a great event. I did that a couple times and really enjoyed it down there. I spent a fair bit of time training actually down in that area, and it's remarkable. A beautiful area. Okay, James says, how should an athlete's training schedule be structured in the lead up to an Ironman event, balancing the demands of swimming, cycling, and running while ensuring adequate recovery and tapering? So James poses a great question. And maybe I'll dive into what tapering is. So tapering is, when we get close to an event, we don't want to carry the same training load right up to that event. We want to allow some rest so that our bodies, first of all, have a chance to fully recover before the event, but also to realize all the fitness gains from all the stress that we've been putting on our body. So a good little rule of thumb is that the heavier the training load that you've been undertaking, the longer that taper often needs to be to really offload all of that deeper fatigue. So you want to arrive at an Ironman start line, or really, any key race start line, feeling as fresh as you possibly can, feeling really ready to go. Often people will push it too close to the race because they get a little nervous. They want to keep testing whether they have the fitness to do the thing that's coming. And I always say that it's better to be a little bit underdone in the training department, but fully rested and healthy, than it is to be even a fraction overdone or injured or unhealthy. So, a taper, typically, let's say you're carrying what I would call a normal training load for somebody that has a job and a family and kids, and maybe for Ironman, you're training sort of in that 12 to 17 or 18 hour a week range. 18 might seem like a lot if you're new to this. Well, when you get into Ironman training, you've got to work out, a week that's 5 or 6 hours on the bike. So right away, right there, you're kind of knocking out a third of those hours. So it's a bit misleading just to say, 18 hours is what you should do. Well, when you start getting those long bikes and, certainly a long run in prep, the hours add up pretty quickly. But if you're sort of in that normal range that most people can handle when they have, as I said, jobs and family, your taper may only need to be a couple of weeks long. But if you're a pro, maybe you're a high volume pro, so you're training 30 to 40 hours a week. Sometimes those tapers will be, 2+ up to 3 weeks in length. Um, I don't think there's a definite answer. There's some research around, the fully realizing all the fitness gains that you would have from big workouts or big volume can take 10 to 14 days to be fully realized. So that can be part of the taper. But also, if you have huge volume, 30 to 40 hours a week, you might need 2 or 3 weeks to really come down from that, realize the fitness gains and feel normal again. So there's no exact right time frame for tapers. Often it's a very personal thing too. Sometimes if people take too long on those tapers, they start to feel not good. The body gets used to a certain level of stress and demand, and when you take that off, it can be a little unsettling. It doesn't always feel awesome. So anyway, so let me relook at the question. Like often, I just go off on tangents. How should an athlete's training schedule be structured in the lead-in? So basically, I believe that the training should be structured in the same way. So if you have a rhythm that you're following in the week where you're doing certain things on certain days, um, you should stick to that rhythm, but you need to bring the volume of training way down. You still want to keep a little bit of intensity in there to keep you sharp. But certainly, if you're at 18 hours of training in your heaviest week going into an Ironman, you want to bring that down probably 10 or less hours. So really cutting it down to maybe say 60-ish%, 70%. And really giving your body a chance to fully recover and get all those fitness gains. So yeah, I would structure it the same way. You're in a rhythm, if Mondays you do this, Tuesdays this, Wednesdays this, then stick to the same schedule. Just dial it back a little bit. You don't want to shut off completely. You'll feel worse. And then the other little rule I give my athletes is in that taper phase, you favor rest over everything. So if you do feel like you just need an extra day off, you just take it because you're not really going to gain any fitness in that time frame. It's too short a time frame to really put a ton of stress on your body and then recover and be fitter, especially when you get within probably 10 days. So take an extra day off if you need it, but keep your feel for all three sports. I think that's really, really important. Good question. Thanks, James. Let's see here. James also says, given the length and diverse conditions of Ironman races, how do you recommend athletes select and adjust their equipment, like wetsuits, bikes, shoes, to cater to specific race conditions and personal performance needs? So yeah, I like most questions that I answer, this one could go quite long. There's a couple really big obvious ones that are important, like wetsuits, right? So you should know the probability of the swim of the event you're going to, whether it's going to be wetsuit or non-wetsuit. Now, often they are, often it's very obvious. So let's say you're going to go do the Ironman World Championships in Kona in Hawaii. It's never not been a wetsuit swim. So that's an easy one. You know that you're going to have some kind of swimming attire that's appropriate for swimming without a wetsuit. And often that's a bit trickier because you then have to decide whether the thing you're wearing in the swim is also going to be suitable for you on the bike and the run. And nowadays, lots of the companies make great suits that you can wear throughout. But you want to have something that's fast to swim in. Wetsuits are fast to swim in, and then you can almost wear whatever you want underneath. You can wear a tri-suit that's not necessarily great for swimming underneath that wetsuit. But when it's non-wetsuit swim, maybe a little trickier. We used to pull like a swim skin over the thing that we were going to wear on the bike and the run. So you have to factor that in. For most Ironmans, people will, sometimes it's really hilly Ironman. People will talk about oh, maybe I should ride a road bike instead of a triathlon bike. And I usually argue against that. I mean, there's very few courses I think in the world where, for 180K, you're not going to be faster on a time trial bike. So that's always my recommendation for people. Shoes are shoes, unless it's like, say, an off-road triathlon where you might want some kind of off-road shoe. I suppose that would be, one thing to consider. But generally speaking, the Ironman events are on paved or, maybe like hard gravel pack. So the fastest shoe these days is going to be a carbon shoe. If you're looking for speed and money's, you can afford it. I mean, they're not cheap. Then you might want to, consider getting a carbon shoe. Maybe not for training, but for the race itself, because you will get a little bit of free speed there. So that's something to consider. Given the length, well, the length of an Ironman, the definition of an Ironman, like the brand of an Ironman, is technically always the same distance. There's half Ironman, which are less, so that might be a consideration. But Ironman, the Ironman brand, like that is a thing, and it has a specific distance. But the diverse conditions, yeah, that's something. So let's say you're going to a race where there's let's go back to the wetsuit thing. If it's right on the bubble and you don't know, well, be prepared for both. They're going to measure the water temperature probably the morning of, and they're going to have a hard cutoff. And, it might go wetsuit and it might go non-wetsuit, and you have to be ready and prepared for both. That's really important. Now, diverse conditions, let's say there's the possibility of, terrible weather. I just had an athlete do the Sacramento Ironman California. And boy, oh boy, he sent me some footage, and it was torrential rain. Now, I think the rain came later on in the race, so what he was wearing was what he was wearing. And hopefully it wasn't too cold rain, like maybe they were already settled in. But, one of the better examples that I had from years ago, Ironman Canada, when it moved to Whistler for a few years, we had 1 year there. I have never seen conditions like that in my life. And I think the dropout rate was enormous. I think the morning of was maybe 6 degrees and pouring rain. It's a mountain town, so it could have snowed. It was like July or August, but it's not high elevation there, but you're surrounded by mountains, and you get a weird weather system that moves in, and it was the nastiest morning I've ever seen. Now, I wasn't racing; I had athletes racing, but that was a bit of a panic because no one was really expecting that kind of weather system to roll through. And certainly, people I think who were prepared actually took extra time in transition and changed out of their wet stuff, put on like the riding gear that they would ride in if they were riding in 6 degrees and raining, which is very different than just wearing, a tri suit. They actually put on like kind of leg warmers, and they put on gloves, and they put on like a windproof jacket, and that saved a lot of people. The people that didn't got very cold very quickly. When you're moving 40K an hour on a bike and the conditions are like that, you can get cold in a hurry. So, it's a great question. I think the thing is to just look ahead and know, the average temperatures and the situation you're getting into, and then think of the extremes. Like, what's the extreme situation that you could end up at the event you're going to, and prepare for that as well. Because it's better be over prepared than and not need it, than under prepared and need it. Something like that. Okay, good question. Thanks, James. James says, I just ran the Ironman in Tempe this weekend. Yep, good, cover that. Awesome. Was it an Ironman or half Ironman? I think it must be the half, because I feel like the full Ironman is coming up. What were my times in the Tempe Ironman? I actually can't remember exactly. I do know I was never over 9 hours, so it was in the 8 hours, something 8:40 something, or I forget. I'd have to go back and look. I mean, we're talking a decade ago at least, maybe even more. No, more than that. Oh my gosh, I think I did it in 2005, and I did it in 2007. Maybe I did it a couple times, and it was a tough course. It was not, it wasn't hilly, but there was wind and there was lots of false flat, and I found that course often very tough. I did well there, but it was, it didn't flow as well as some of the other races for some reason, but still enjoyed doing it. James says, what is the best way to deal with a heat wave? This weekend was unusually hot, and it was a true challenge. So yeah, I mean, heat waves are interesting because, if it's not the norm for where you live, then your body won't really be acclimated. But if you know that you're going to a race with a climate that's very, very hot, then you should prepare for that climate. So, a little personal story. I did Ironman World Championships in Hawaii a number of times and never really had tremendous success there. And, in hindsight's always easy. But I think in hindsight, what I would have done differently is actually gone and lived in Kona probably for 6 months leading in. I was not awesome in the heat. It was not a natural state for me to be in. I'm a good old Canadian fella. And, where it's rare that we get those hot conditions, except for out in Ontario. So I lived in Ontario, which is in the eastern part of Canada, or central eastern, and we would get some pretty gnarly days in the summer, high humidity, very hot. And when I would spend my summers there, I actually did reasonably well in hot conditions because I was living in hot conditions. It was, I was playing the starving athlete role, so we never had air conditioning in the house. We were sleeping in it, we were living in it, we were eating in it, and yeah, no surprise, I actually raced quite well in it. When I moved to the West Coast, it's very rare that we get those hot conditions that you would get in Hawaii. And so we would try and make do. I'd be, doing my trainer rides in the bathroom with the shower on and the humidifier on, trying to sweat it out. But it was never quite the same. And I really needed to, I think it really exposed myself to those conditions. So a hindsight thing for me would be to go live in a hot climate before, doing Ironman World Championships. Not everybody needs to do that. Some people can go for a couple of weeks, do a training camp, their body adapts, they acclimate, and then they can kind of come back and forth, and that acclimation hangs out for a little bit. But in my case, I needed probably a bit more. Now, what was your question again? What's the best way to deal with a heat wave? Well, okay, so let's say you live in a cold climate and you get this rare burst of heat. Well, first and foremost, you have to be careful in those heat waves. The body is then, you're throwing another stress at the body that it's not necessarily ready for. So you might want to consider bringing the volume of the training down a little bit during the heat wave. Certainly the intensity can come down a little bit. If you're doing your stuff on heart rate, if that's how you're measuring your effort, you'll find that the pace that you're able to run, if you're not acclimated in hot conditions, is generally slower. So don't force the pace, hang out in the heart rate that you're supposed to, and it might just mean you're running a bit slower. Of course, being mindful of hydration, throughout the day, making sure your electrolytes are up to speed. But probably just taking it a little bit easier during that heat wave. Hopefully, if it's a heat wave, it's not going to last forever. And then you can kind of get back to normal, a few days later. So you just got to be careful in heat waves. You can't, there's no sense in enforcing it. But again, if you live in a hot climate for long enough, your body acclimates and you can do quite well. So another question here. Considering the sheer duration and varied terrains of Ironman races, how can athletes prepare mentally for each segment, especially when facing the notorious mental walls during the marathon run? Okay, love this question. The mental side of it's huge. One of the biggest things I think people can do is, I say this all the time, is break it into small pieces. So if you go to an Ironman and the swim course is marked, if you look at the swim course in its entirety, it's overwhelming. You're like, oh my gosh, how on earth am I going to swim that far? But they'll have buoys along the way. They'll have these huge turning buoys way at the end that you have to turn around. But along the way, they'll have all these smaller buoys to help guide the path. And all I used to do is swim from buoy to buoy. I never actually did the whole swim in my head. I knew I could swim that 100 meters. That was easy to the first buoy. And then I would just swim the 100 meters to the next one, and so on and so on. So I just go in small chunks. I always found it better if my brain, managed just smaller pieces. Same with on the bike. On the bike, if I knew the course, which was most of the time, I didn't even break it into distances. Like Ironman Canada, for example, the first section I'd ride to a Soyuz, which was like 60K. I knew that section. So mentally, I'd just, dial into that section. It was flat and fast, usually a tailwind. So I have my mental cues through those sections. I usually felt good because it's early in the race. And then the next section was this first big climb. It was a 10K climb up Richter's Pass. So I would handle that section on its own mentally. So my point is I would break it into mental chunks. Now, one of the things that I really try and instill, this is going to sound a little bit hokey pokey, maybe, whatever you want to call it. But one of the things I tell newer athletes, I had a guy who just, as I said, did Ironman California this weekend, and we were talking about the mental game in the days leading in. And I said, I think you need to approach it in some ways like you're a warrior. You're going out to do battle. Like, I think we like this idea that, we've signed up for something that's really, really huge. And, what's it going to pull out of us? Are we going to be a warrior, or are we going to kind of cower away? And most people, they want to be a warrior. They want to be brave and courageous and all these things. Now, is it the same kind of bravery you need if you're going to war or some monumental thing where you might lose your life? Well, no. At the end of the day, it doesn't really actually mean much. You're going to go do an Ironman. It's great. Yay. Awesome. But it doesn't necessarily change the world. Like, the fate of your life isn't at stake. So it's not like that. But I think if you can bring that side of yourself out, it can be really powerful. So sometimes going into races, I would make it more than it actually was. In the grand scheme of things, big picture didn't really mean much, really. I mean, it meant a lot to me. So it's not fair to sort of say, it doesn't mean anything, because of course it means a lot to people. But, given the state of the whole world, it's arguably not that important. But you can still show up as a warrior. You can show up and kind of be courageous and be all these things that we kind of like. And I think that is a mental skill, or that is a mental sort of cue, is really powerful. Another thing we talked about is actually limiting the amount of kind of highs and lows that you experience in an Ironman. Ironman's so long. If you show up race morning and you're peak, like emotional stress, you got like 5 minutes to that kind of energy. So you have to stay really present. You have to stay calm in those early stages. One of the places that gets people into trouble is they'll run out of transition for the run, and they see their family and their friends, and they get this surge of adrenaline, and all of a sudden they're running a minute per mile faster than they should be running. This is a mistake. So you have to be aware that energy is going to creep up inside you, and it's probably going to make you run too fast. So you have to kind of just chill that stuff out. So that's also a mental strategy, is not, getting too high, trying to be as level as you can all day. However, now let's say we're in the last 5-10K of this thing, and we're really starting to struggle. The body's starting to break down like it inevitably does. And, how are you going to find those, energy reserves to get you another kilometer down the road? Well, one of the things you can do is think about it. If you got kids, think about how you're going to show up for your kids. Like, what do you want them to see? It sounds like, I don't know what it sounds like. It sounds a bit dramatic. That's probably the best word. But in that moment, you might need that kind of energy to get you through the next kilometer or the next mile. So I encourage people, when they get later into the race, when they get deeper into the race, to really use that emotional energy, use that kind of energy we get from friends and family that have showed up for us. And the best way to phrase it is like, how do I want to show up for these people? Do I want to be brave and courageous and keep going? Or am I going to kind of cower away and give up? And nobody wants to be that option. We all want to get to the finish and have that side of us come out. I think that feels pretty good. So I think those mental cues are really, really powerful. Again, on the marathon run, hitting the wall, this is something that often goes back to nutrition. So sometimes the mental side of it actually has nothing to do with the mental side of it. It has to do with what's going on inside our body with our blood sugar. One of the early signs that we're getting low on blood sugar and muscle glycogen, like our stored reserves, is that we start to lose motivation. We start to get a bit sleepy. Those are early signs that, hey, I might just need a bit more carbohydrate. So mental sort of inspirational speeches aside, you might just need a bit more carbohydrate, which is kind of, a boring thing to have to do to get mentally charged up. But if we have good energy reserves in our body, mentally, we can often be a little grittier. As soon as we start to wane in our blood sugar, we'll find all kinds of reasons to stop doing what we're doing because we don't want to bump. Anyway, that's that's a good question. The mental side of it I find fascinating. Again, at the risk of sounding dramatic, I think for me, one of the most powerful things that I used to do was make it more than it was. I made it a battle out there. I wanted to be a warrior. I wanted to feel that side of me. Whether consciously or not, I did that. And you can say what you want about, that it's again, it sounds a bit hokey, but um, I really would show up and want to do battle with, the my competitors out there, with myself. I wanted to see what I was capable of in terms of what I was willing to do to push myself. Ironman was, it doesn't matter if you won the thing or, back of the pack. We're all dealing with some sort of sense of survival. The winners are just surviving. The Ironman World Championships last weekend or 2 weekends ago, Lucy Charles Barkley won it for the first time. She's amazing. She's come second, I think, 4 times. So she really paid her dues there. And she finally won it. And I can guarantee that race was not easy the whole way. Yes, she would have had moments where she felt high as a kite and amazing. She led from start to finish. I mean, lots of good energy for her there. But there would have been moments where she really had to battle, where she really had to dig and be mentally tough. So even if you're she led literally from start to finish. So gun goes off. She's the fastest swimmer. She outrides, she stays at the front for the ride and she stays at the front for the run. So all day she's in first. But for sure, on the run, probably there's the odd kilometer or mile where it was real tough, hard on the body, and she just had to dig in there and keep going. So, and same goes for the person who finished in 15, 16, 17 hours. They have moments out there where they're not sure they're going to make it. And so what do? Well, they have to make a decision whether they're going to be brave, courageous, keep going, keep moving forward. And it's mind over matter. It's kind of neat. I think that's why people love Ironman so much and why they take such great pride in, that finisher's medal. And it's one of the only brands you'll see routinely tattooed on people's bodies, because I think they're just so incredibly proud of what they've accomplished, and for good reason. It's not easy. It's a very tough day, no matter who you are. So, good questions. Doesn't look like we have any more here. I'll give it a minute here just in case anybody wants to pop another question in there. Otherwise, as usual, this has been great. I just always so appreciate the questions that people ask. Another reminder that these are all available. They're recorded, and you can find them in the back end of the free version of actually My Endurance Hub, which is great. You have access to these. And and again, if you have friends that might be interested in the topics, please send them our way, and make sure you check out everything else we got going on as well. By the way, did I mention we just crossed the 1,300 member threshold? I can't believe I'm saying that. I can't believe it. It's amazing. We have, and people filling out their profiles and adding pictures. Really enthusiastic about the platform we have here, and it's so incredibly exciting. So, anyway, let's wrap that up there. I appreciate everybody's time here, and happy training, everybody. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Take care.